Perfect. Okay, well, it is 10 a.m. and I will go ahead and call the meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming today. We got a full house, which is great. I know Director Jacoby really appreciates the time and everybody being here for this special meeting. Let's do introduction of commissioners. I want to welcome Dr. Deb Shropshire. Welcome to the commission. Here and excited for your leadership at DHS.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Let's go around as a part of calling roll and let's just introduce yourselves.
Good morning. I'm Melinda Front, Executive Director of Department of Rehab Services.
I'm Jennery Harrington, Commissioner representing Oklahoma Children in Residential Programs.
Keith Reed, Commissioner of Health, Oklahoma State Department of Health.
Deb Shropshire, Director of Oklahoma Human Services.
Kevin Corbett, CEO of the Healthcare Authority, as well as Secretary of Health and Mental Health.
I'm Jason Hicks, the district attorney for the 6th district, which is Caddo, Grady, Stevens, and Jefferson County.
I'm Jonathan Hall, the governor's appointee to represent business and industry.
Rachel Holt, Executive Director of the Office of Juvenile Affairs.
Good morning. My name is Lindsay Laird. I am a commissioner appointed by Senate Pro Tem Greg Treat as a member of the community interested in improving child serving systems, not employed by the state of Oklahoma, and I work for OCCY in community outreach and engagement.
Jacqueline Aaron, I'm the Executive Director for CASA of Western Oklahoma, and I am representing CASA.
Good morning, I'm Kathleen Arietta. I'm the Executive Assistant at OCCY.
I'm Tanner Bolzer. I'm an Assistant Attorney General and I am the Commission's legal advisor.
Matt Jacoby here at OCCY.
I'm John Schneider, Executive Director at Youth and Family Services over in El Reno, and here representing the Oklahoma Association of Youth Services. So thank you all. Is there any other announcements or welcome we need to do?
Folks on video.
Folks on video,
yeah.
correct. Thank you.
Commissioner.
Hey, good morning. My name is Brad Wilson. I'm the commissioner for the Oklahoma Bar Association.
Okay, thank you. All right, we will go on to agenda item number 2, public comment. Do we have anybody signed up for public comment today?
Is Dr. LaFortune a commissioner? It says commissioner on her Zoom title. We might want to change the Zoom title from commissioner.
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
Oh, good catch.
Ellen will have to do that because she's the host. Ellen?
We got it fixed. Okay.
Okay. Perfect. Anybody for public comment today? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 3, discussion and possible vote to modify or approve the September 22 regular commission meeting. I have a motion.
So moved.
First, we have a second.
Second.
Perfect. Any discussion? Please call roll.
Commissioner Aaron,
Yes.
Secretary Corbett,
Yes.
Director Front,
Yes.
Commissioner Hall,
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington,
Yes.
Director Holt,
Yes.
Commissioner Laird,
Abstain.
Commissioner Myers. She's not here, right?
I'm going to abstain because I just finally got my computer working.
Okay. Commissioner Reed,
Abstain.
Commissioner Schneider,
Yes.
Director Shropshire,
Abstain.
and Commissioner Wilson.
Yes.
And the motion passes.
Perfect. Okay, we will move on to agenda item number 5. We have a presentation and go ahead.
We got another set of minutes.
Oh, did I missed one. This is why I usually use paper. I'm terrible. Agenda item number 4. We need a discussion or possible vote to modify or approve the minutes from the December 1st, 2020 special commission meeting. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
First and a second, any discussion? Please call vote.
I'm sorry, Lindsay, you seconded, yes?
I second.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, Commissioner Aaron,
Yes.
Secretary Corbett,
Yes.
Director Front,
Yes.
Commissioner Hall,
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington,
Yes.
District Attorney Hicks,
Yes.
Director Holt,
Yes.
Commissioner Laird,
Yes.
Commissioner Myers,
Yes.
Commissioner Reed, Commissioner Schneider,
Yes.
Director Shropshire,
Abstain.
and Commissioner Wilson.
Yes.
And the motion passes.
Perfect, thank you. I'd also like to welcome Commissioner Myers, who joined just a minute ago, and please record her attendance to the record as well.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
It's okay. Okay, agenda item number 5, discussion or possible vote to approve the financial report. And I will turn it over to Megan Patton.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm just gonna warn you guys, I'm like so nervous. I hate public speaking, so please bear with me while I nervously fumble through this. I was informed that some people might not be really familiar with these financial statements, so if you have it to follow along with, I'll kind of discuss like what they are, so you know what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna start with the BPA, which is the budget to actuals. It's basically it's what you guys have budgeted, what you've actually spent, what you have encumbered, which is on a purchase order that's available still. And so yeah, this very first row here is the annual budget. You guys have $4,826,969 budgeted. And then your current expenses have been $2,541,735.40. Encumbrances are $494,633.03. And then the total of those two combined is $3,050,368.43. And then the annual variance here on the end, I don't know if you guys are.
We got it. Yep.
Okay. That's the difference between what you budgeted, what you spent, and what you still have available on your purchase order. So that's $1,776,600.53. If anybody has any questions, you can feel free to ask. My report printed on 2 sides and it's like upside down. That's so weird. Okay, so moving on to the next report. This is the ABC, the available cash balance, basically. So this very first one at the top, that 191, refers to the general revenue fund for FY21. And then I don't know if everybody knows about this, but 19101 was the original general revenue fund. The next one, which is 19111, is we rolled it forward once, so it went to FY22, and then 19121 is the roll forward to FY23. So these will always be tied back to the original general revenue fund. So 192 is FY22, 193 is FY23, and as we roll them forward, they will change a little bit, but still be tied to the original fund. So there is no more cash available in 191, which is the FY21, which is good. You want to spend it all before you lose it. In 192, there's $415,545.20. For 193, which is FY23, there's $154,547.95. This 200 down here is the revolving fund, and in that you have $320,363.06. The 210 is the CAMDA revolving fund, and that has $40,884.97. And then the very last one, 994, is payroll withholding. So that's a negative 9780. Moving on to the next page. This is the summary of receipts and disbursements, or the SRD. And it just shows what revenue you had coming into that fund and what you had going out of the fund. So the first one, 191, is of course at 0. And this ties back to that ABC, the cash balance report. So these should all match. 192 is $415,545.20. 193 is $154,547.95. The 200 is $320,363.06. 210 is $40,884.97. 994 is negative 9780. And then on the last page, this the 79901 is the clearing account. So anytime you guys have money coming in, that's not from a trusted source, it goes into this account. And then I do a reconciliation every month and move that money into funds available to be spent. So right now there's $57,234.78. And then on the last page, it's just the total of all of those. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'll try and answer, but like my brain is going blank.
You did great.
Megan, that was a great report, and appreciate the detail. I think I mentioned this during the last meeting. If we had sort of, and I'm not sure if it's OMES or if we could even provide just a brief kind of legend or code of these, which, what each class is, and then a brief description, just kind of as a reference point as we're going back and forth would be really helpful.
I can add that to the report. So that's sort of like, I put it on my report. So I can add that to the report before I send it. I didn't know if you guys wanted me to write all over your reports. So I can add that so you'll know.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Perfect. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I will entertain a motion. A motion to approve the financial report. Does any a second? Motion and a second. Any discussion? Please call vote.
Commissioner Aaron,
Yes.
Secretary Corbett,
Yes.
Director Front,
Yes.
Commissioner Hall,
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington,
Yes.
District Attorney Hicks,
Yes.
Director Holt,
Yes.
Commissioner Laird,
Yes.
Commissioner Myers,
Yes.
Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Schneider,
Yes.
Director Shropshire,
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson,
Yes.
motion is passed.
Perfect. Thank you. Next is agenda item number 6, discussion or possible action to adopt the OCCY rule changes by OCCY commissioners following public comment period. And I'm going to turn it over to Marcia Johnson.
Good morning, Commissioners. So the vote that you're about to take this morning will formally adopt the rules that you saw back in December. There were no changes. The vote follows the required public comment period. And we scheduled a public hearing for February 9th per the APA, Act, and we had no one show up for that. So this is a vote to formally adopt rules. They are exactly the same that you saw in December with one change. Per Commissioner Holt's suggestion, instead of updating the address of our office, we are just removing that from the rules. That's unusual and it's cumbersome to have to try to go in and change it, remove it again. So, we can take any questions if there are any.
Any other questions? I'll entertain a motion
So moved.
first.
Second.
First and a second. Any discussion? Please call vote.
I'm sorry, who seconded?
Perfect. Thank you.
So can I just, so we followed all of the, I don't know all the APA requirements, but legal counsel is telling us we followed all the posting and, okay. I know it's cumbersome, so appreciate the staff for doing that. Might want to tell them the next step.
Oh, yeah. So that after you adopt these, then I will file them for the online filing system. I'm learning all this too for the first time. As having worked with the legislature, this is brand new, this side of it. So I'm learning too. But yes, the Secretary of State's office is wonderful. They have detailed guides. They make staff available. So once you adopt it, then I will online filing. It'll go to the governor, speaker, the pro tem, and the chairs of the administrative rules committee for action, adoption, or rejection.
Other discussion? Okay, call vote.
Commissioner Aaron,
Yes.
Secretary Corbett,
Yes.
Director Front,
Yes.
Commissioner Hall,
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington,
Yes.
District Attorney Hicks,
Yes.
Director Holt,
Yes.
Commissioner Laird,
Yes.
Commissioner Myers,
Yes.
Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
Director Shropshire,
Yes.
and Commissioner Wilson.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you. Okay, agenda item number 7 is discussion or possible vote to add House Bill 1028 to the OCCY legislative agenda. And I will turn the floor over to Sherry Fair.
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners and Director Jacoby for having me. I was gonna tell Megan, I get a public speak all the time and I still get nervous, so that doesn't go away. Well, first, I'd like to tell you that I'm here representing a work group that is passionate about making Oklahoma a better place for children and families. We've been together about 3 or 4 years. We passed some legislation last legislative season, which basically just brought in line that a judge could allow a child victim up to the age of 18 to testify by video. It was just 13. So I think Commissioner Shropshire helped us with that. So thank you. So what we're doing this year is, of course, many of us on this committee don't really like corporal punishment, and especially we don't like corporal punishment in the schools. But what we especially are passionate about is that corporal punishment should not be administered to children who fall underneath the IDEA definition, which is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So with the support of Representative John Talley for House Bill 1028 and also Senator Kay Floyd for a companion bill in the Senate, but right now we're focusing on the House bill. We are asking that it be put in place that corporal punishment not be allowed to be used on any children who fall underneath the definition of IDEA. And there was a point where the current special education policies and procedures does say at one point, as applied to students with disabilities entitled to special education services under the Individuals with Disabilities Act, the use of corporal punishment by employees or agents of an Oklahoma public schools prohibited beginning in 2021. However, SDE did a survey that's, of the schools in the last school year, which was 21-22. And in spite of that, there are still 63 Oklahoma school districts that administer corporal punishment to students with disabilities. And there were 455 total incidents of students with disabilities receiving corporal punishment during that school year. So we would like to put into law that corporal punishment cannot be administered on any child who falls underneath the IDEA. And the reason we need to do that is because there's still a waiver available, and parents can sign a waiver to let their child have corporal punishment administered on them in the school, even if they fall under IDEA. So I will take questions, but I'm here today to ask you to please add that to the OCCY legislative agenda. And it also allow us to use your logo on the back of this one pager that we're using up at the Capitol so that they know that OCCY supports this. Yes.
Hi, I'm Melinda Front, Director of the Department of Rehab Services. Can you repeat when you first started that discussion, did I understand you to say that Oklahoma has an allowance under that? Do we still allow corporal punishment? I know you said 63 school districts still allow it and administer it, but what did you say prior to that? I didn't quite catch.
Well, there's still a waiver that parents can still sign a waiver and they can still administer corporal punishment. So the parental waiver, I guess, nullifies this. So we want to put it into law that they can't use corporal punishment on any IDEA student. Okay. So therefore that would kind of make the waiver go away. Okay. Did I answer that?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you.
How do schools know if a student is classified under IDEA?
Well, if there is anyone here with a better education background than my 8 years of Oklahoma City Public Schools, it's because it is a whole process. And
they will have an IEP.
It will be on their
an
file.
IEP.
Okay, yeah, all students would have to have an IEP.
No.
Okay, see,
Well,
not-
but
But if it
But
falls
this is
under,
focusing on IDEA though, right?
right, it's just
Okay.
focusing on those that qualify for IDEA,
Yes.
which basically means, and please help me if you can, which basically means that they have a diagnosed condition such as ADHD, sickle cell anemia, autism, those students. shouldn't have corporal punishment administered to them, but there are still school districts doing it. So if we can put it into law, then they can't do it. And if you read down through this one pager, first of all, I know from being Prevent Child Abuse Oklahoma that children with disabilities are at a much higher risk of abuse and neglect. And there are also illnesses that do fall under that IDEA that make sensitivity stronger. Also, that could make their behavioral issues worse because perhaps school personnel doesn't understand that the behavior is actually part of the disability. And I would like to point out, because I forgot this, is that the Oklahoma State Department of Education has a great deal of school districts trainings on multi-tiered system of supports regarding behavior that will give school personnel tools that are safer to use on IDEA students other than corporal punishment. And I personally, after 8 years of school district, I learned a lot, like what true poverty is and how some children have to live. And school is often the last safe place for children. And they shouldn't have to come to school and still be scared.
I'm still a little confused, going back to your question. So do they have an IEP or?
Yes, they do.
They
have
will
to
have an IEP.
Well, they have to, in order to be identified under IDEA, they have to be on an IEP.
So it's clear with the schools.
It should be.
Should be, yeah, I agree.
Like, what about the kids often have like a behavioral plan, like a section
If it's a
504 behavioral plan?
that wouldn't qualify as this.
Okay.
It would just be those that qualify for IDEA. We did want to include that, but in talking to the legislature, the 504s and just the sole IEP.
I mean, essentially, we need it to be all students, right? Like not
I know,
just.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
I guess I personally didn't know corporal punishment was still being administered, my personal opinion of it. But this is very disturbing that it even goes so far as almost targeting those on IDEA.
So currently it's prohibited, but parents can sign a waiver.
Right.
And so this statute would then get rid of that waiver option and just ban it for
And so
all
they-
children
parents
under
have parental
IDEA.
choice.
And the numbers you gave were specifically for this group and not the overall population.
Yes, correct. Yeah, it was specifically for this group.
Do I see here that it's self-reported by schools. That's how we receive our data. Does the bill outline consequences for schools? What is the response?
The bill does not outline consequences for schools. I have 2 copies of the bill. But it does not do that. It basically just strikes language. You want to take the time to, it's a very short bill. It's like, okay. So it did say school district personnel shall be prohibited from using corporal punishment on students. But we had to change that to any student identified with a disability in accordance with the IDEA in order to get it through legislation. This committee does not agree with corporal punishment in schools at all, but we have to take baby steps. And so,
Well, that's one of my questions, is the next step to go and completely abolish it from schools totally?
Was that the original tally? Wasn't the original Representative Tally bill for all corporal punishment for all students?
no.
No, it was always disabled.
It just had the 504 and the IEP in there.
Okay.
And so I think that was really, we would like to see corporal punishment completely taken out of schools, but I know you understand that in this state that could be difficult. And so this is, I guess we have talked to legislators, and protecting the most vulnerable is how we would like to go this legislative season.
Well, and my next question on that is going to be, wouldn't it be better to allow the parents in conjunction with the schools to make that decision? Because if they've got to sign a waiver now to allow it, that parent in a better position than we are to say, you can't have that as an option inside your school.
Well, we look at the parental control issue, and I do agree with parental control and local control, and I do want you to know that. I think that where we fall down on that is that we're not taking parental control away, because if your child does something that you feel that they should be paddled, then you can do that. If you want to come to school and do it, you can do that. Or if you want to wait till they get home in the evening, you can do that. We would rather you not, but it is parental control and that is your choice.
So this is a process question. What does it mean to say that we're going to approve this or not, to add it to our legislative agenda? What does that mean?
It means she's asking if we can include our logo, endorse this as we support this legislation at the Capitol.
And she may pull in Marcia if, you know, there is a meeting that she wanted to have Marcia there for.
How close does that get to us being viewed as lobbying? Because I don't believe we have the ability to lobby.
A great question. Generally, we don't ask for, unless it's a request bill to change something about our agency statute. Well, you know what? That's a really great question. That's why you're here. What do you think?
That's a really great question.
Okay. It's something we've been doing for 3 or 4 years, just to be clear, so that we didn't get pulled in. In the past, we'd get asked for our opinions on things. And I'm goosey about giving an opinion because really it's representing all of you, not Annette Jacoby. So that's why we've been bringing them here. But, and people do come and ask us to kind of join forces with them, much like they might reach out to other agencies from time to time. But I've never pondered it that way because we don't really think of it as, well, I always thought of it as educating about an issue, but this would be supporting actual legislation, and actually that is how we've been couching some of this. I think historically you asked us for support on bills that you are writing and leading. Yeah. And we vote on the bills on behalf that are OCCY request bills. But
And I know it's not uncommon for we to be asked, you know, what's our view with regards to a bill that may have presented itself and maybe we have a different point of view than the author. But this is more about outward kind of sponsorship through some kind of marketing material. Is that something that we typically do or should do or shouldn't do?
If it's just about the handout and the marketing, I don't know that we've done that before. But at the same time, regardless of the handout, we have lend our assistance for bills, like particularly if they were falling within recommendations of the Child Death Review Board, like the car seat bill and things like that, right? But I still have we still put that on the agenda, whether it was ours or not, but we have people request time to time like this to come in front of you because they think it's an issue that many agencies would be interested in and have an intersection with.
So maybe we could just put it on, I mean, either agree to put it on our watch list for our agencies or our groups or not, instead of actually putting the logo on there. You know, the watch list brings a whole different take on it to where you're watching it to see if your organization or anyone related to the consumer base you serve, it would affect them. And if so, and how you do impact how you do business, then you take an action. But that's per organization or per agency versus as a collective group.
Do we
We have it at, like, for instance, at DRS, I went back, I had to refresh my memory. We have 2 schools, all kids are on IEPs. We do not issue corporal punishment. We don't even have a waiver. I mean, we just don't do it. And so we have this on our watch list, but our attorney did not feel that we should get involved in the rights of parents at other schools, although I personally believe, you know, it's just that I can have my personal opinions versus what our agency does.
I think for those of us that serve as commissioners in our official appointed or capacity to speak on behalf of our entire agency and the people that appoint us might be difficult.
Sure.
I appreciate the talking points, you know, I help write talking points for legislation, and I know and love Carolyn McAllister, but there's, you know, and it's, I understand, you know, for this bill, these are great talking points. They go kind of a little, you know, they say, you know, corporal punishment, which is never appropriate for any child. I think some of the legislator would of course disagree with that. And so I would have concerns having OCCY seal on it because it's
For sure.
I appreciate Secretary Corbett flagging this as potential lobbying with regard
Just
to.
like to stay within the fairway.
Yeah, and I think I get a little concerned with this particular flyer having bill numbers on there tied directly to that. But my question is, as an organization, do we have any data or information that would be helpful that we could come in more in an education capacity with regard to this? I don't know if we do. When you mentioned the seatbelt thing, I thought that does tie so closely, but if we have not necessarily done any research or any reports tied directly to this, then maybe there isn't a connection naturally from an education standpoint.
I think we would be willing to discuss editing the one page.
I think the one pager is strong. I'm saying like it's a good one pager.
It is.
For this bill, it's a good one pager. I'm saying I wouldn't want you to edit. I wouldn't want you to edit the one pager because it's a good one
You
pager.
say Carolyn comes running to me for these things, so.
I also have concerns about going through the legislative process, how the language changes through the process. And if we have our logo on this, that's kind of a snapshot in time, how it looks now. But we all know how the amendment process and everything works as well. And so, you know, what we say that we would approve now, that wouldn't apply if there was any kind of change to it as well.
Any other comments or questions?
So I'm hearkening back to a previous meeting 2 or 3 years ago when it was about vaccines. And we had a group coming wanting to do just the same thing, had to have us on the logo. A couple of you may have been on the commission at that time. And I believe it was Becky Eichert who brought up the issue of perhaps because it was an issue that folks around the table seemingly could not kind of have an agreement. And she also said, I would feel comfortable with my agency being on this if we choose to, but maybe collectively we don't do that. And she said, because it's in my wheelhouse. And at the time, so this feels reminiscent of that. So I'll just throw that out there.
I see like the people that like Youth Services of Tulsa is already on, you know, there are, I think, for those of you that represent organizations or even state agencies that would like to support individually, I just don't know. I don't see any other state agencies currently on the list. I don't know if we're the first to be asked.
We got to ask individually.
I'm not hearing that we will need a motion, but I'll entertain one just in case. Okay. Thank you so much for your presentation. Do you have any other comments or anything?
Yeah, well, thank you for your time, but what should I go back and tell the work group? Can you help me with that?
Well, I think collectively, because they represent so many different disciplines and fields and agencies, whether it's a state government or a nonprofit or something different, that they would feel more comfortable maybe being approached individually, if that makes sense. And some folks feel like it's not even within their wheelhouse necessarily, right? So I don't know that I think that's what I would say. It's not that everyone is thumbs down as much as it is, would you maybe approach people individually so they have an ability to say yay or nay? Does anyone disagree with that?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sherry.
Okay, next on the agenda is agenda item number 8. Discussion or possible vote on proposed bill to financially support foster youth who are aging out of the system. And I will turn this over to Emma Morris. Oh, and Jill Mickey, thank you.
So hi, everyone. My name is Jill Menke. I'm the Youth Justice Policy Analyst at Oklahoma Policy Institute. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit that works on creating equitable and fiscally responsible policies for all Oklahomans. So we're here today to talk about the barriers that youth face aging out of foster care. And I have Emma Morris here with me today. And we're going to talk about possible policy solutions to that problem. So there we go. Okay, so as many of you may know, our state's child welfare system strives to protect children from maltreatment, support families in crisis, and ultimately ensure that children have safe, permanent homes with their families, relatives, adoptive parents, or legal guardians. However, there are still 200 youth that age out of foster care every year in Oklahoma, which means they were not reunited with their family members or any community support. So they lose their family support and community support at a really critical time in their development. So the good news is that however many adverse outcomes that foster youth face when they age out of the system, those can be reduced by providing family support and community support to young people. So the transition to young adulthood is a really significant and challenging developmental phase of life for young people. Youth that transition out of foster care often lack the consistent, supportive adult relationships that most of us depend on well into our 20s and beyond. Many also lose access to services and supports that are offered through the foster care system. Under current law, you lose that support at 18, which, as many of you might know, you still need help after you turn 18. So not surprisingly, these youth and young adults are more likely to experience behavioral, mental, and physical health issues, housing problems and homelessness, difficulties with employment, early parenthood, and also interaction with the criminal justice system. So housing instability and homelessness are also significant challenges faced by former foster youth. The stability of a home can function as a cushion that promotes positive life outcomes across areas like education, employment, and health. If you have a home, you have access to all of those things that have positive outcomes to your well-being. Unstable housing can create a negative feedback loop because it can compromise your physical and mental health. It can limit your workforce participation, and limited employment can also lead to housing instability. So it's a cycle that just perpetuates itself. If you have housing instability, it leads to all these other problems. So without stable housing, young people face enormous challenges staying in school, gaining employment, and reaching self-sufficiency. One of the things that plays a critical role in young people's ability to support themselves is education. Education plays a really critical role in young people's ability to support themselves and their families, maintaining a fulfilling career, and in building a strong social network. Young people who have experienced foster care have on average poorer educational outcomes than their peers. You can see on this slide, if you compare 19-year-olds who are former foster youth with all 19-year-olds, they're much less likely to have graduated high school or have a college degree. So steady and meaningful employment is a key aspect of a healthy and productive adulthood because it provides financial security as well as gives us a sense of purpose. You'll have jobs, and I'm sure you feel very purposeful in your jobs. But finding and keeping a job is often a challenge for transition age youth. One study found that by age 24, only half of youth formerly in foster care were employed. And even those who are employed face challenges making ends meet because they often don't earn high enough wages to cover basic needs that would allow them to lift themselves up out of poverty. Another barrier that former foster youth face is they're more likely to experience early parenthood. unplanned pregnancies often present major obstacles for youth trying to establish themselves. Early parenthood might interrupt education, which, as we just saw, negatively impacts employment and earning potential. As you can see on this slide, 7 in 10 young women who age out of foster care have already experienced pregnancy by age 21. And of those women, more than half have been pregnant more than once. Pregnancy is not just about mothers, of course. Half of the young men in this study reported that they had gotten someone pregnant, compared to just 19% of all other youth their age. So that all being said, the problems with housing and employment, former foster youth are just less likely to be living with their children, meaning that their child is likely in the child welfare system. Thus further perpetuating the cycles of trauma and poverty, like I've mentioned. So on top of all of this, former foster youth are also more likely to interact with the criminal justice system. We know that this is especially problematic because any conviction or anything on your record is likely to further exacerbate the problems that I've talked about, which then compounds on other issues like your health, mental health, and so on. As you can see, 1 in 4 former foster youth were involved in the criminal justice system just within 2 years of aging out. And that number increases to 1 in 3 by age 21. So that all being said, there is hope. The good news is that these trajectories that I've talked about aren't guaranteed for every person aging out of the foster care system, and they can be positively influenced by policies and practices that ensure former foster youth get the stability and services and support that they need to successfully navigate adulthood, achieve stability, and reach their full potential. So being from the Oklahoma Policy Institute, I wouldn't talk about a problem without a solution. So we've spent the past few months thinking about what the solution is, and Emma's going to talk a little bit more about that. So I will turn it over.
Go to the next slide while you're doing that. So I'm Emma. I didn't introduce myself at the beginning, but I'm the healthcare and fiscal policy analyst at Oklahoma Policy. So while Jill's, can talk about all of the barriers that people are facing, I can really focus on like how can we use fiscal and tax policy to help people overcome. A lot of what Jill talked about today is really depressing, and I know all of you encounter a lot of these issues every day. You're working every day to make sure that we're supporting this vulnerable population. And a lot of what she talked about in particular, people face these barriers not because they're just bad people, but because they don't have the supports, the full range of supports that they need in order to get them successfully transitioned out of foster care into being, a citizen who's working and housed and all of these things. So as I said, we know so many of you are working tirelessly to support and find ways to more robustly support this group. And so we want to talk about a policy solution that would help supplement those existing efforts. Fiscal policy in particular is important in this effort because we know that from years of research, income support such as the earned income tax credit and different forms of cash assistance are proven to reduce poverty. And that's really kind of the root of all of these issues we're talking about today. So these income supports help people meet their basic needs, which in turn frees up the energy and the emotional energy to seek out other things like higher education, career training, or a different or better job. So with that in mind, we started having conversations several months ago with OCCY and DHS and the Oklahoma Successful Adulthood Program, several other direct service organizations to kind of think about how can we better support these youth. And we're still working out some of the details, but our legislative proposal this year is basically what's on the slide. It would be to create and fund an annual stipend of $500 to all former foster youth who are between the ages of 18 to 25. This would specifically be for the people who age out, those 200 youth that age out without being reunited or having different levels of familial support. So the stipend would be tied to a specific need that OCCY already helps to provide. So that could be something like funding education or career training, helping someone pay the deposit for an apartment, that kind of thing. And it would be distributed through OCCY, the Oklahoma Successful Adulthood Program, who already has the experience and the infrastructure to stand up this type of program. So of course, $500 isn't the magic solution to all of the issues that we talked about today, right? Like it's a lot, but it's not going to fix the fundamental problem. But we do see this as kind of a first step, a way to provide more support to start here and see what we can do in the future. So we see this $500 as something that could help someone get through an emergency, replace their tires so they can get to work, pay a housing deposit, or make up the income from a few lost shifts because you're sick, things like that. Things that a lot of us have savings for. So this would be kind of something to help these youth get through those emergencies. We estimate that the programmatic cost would be about a maximum of $800,000 annually, and that's assuming that every eligible person knows about and takes advantage of the entire $500. So that's on the high side. And we've been working closely with Representative Lawson, as well as OCCY and Marcia and several other partners to kind of think about what should it ultimately look like. But Representative Lawson has talked about potentially a partnership with Speaker McCall on House Bill 1929, which would, in its current form, expand the population that OCCY can serve. And so kind of putting this in that bill would kind of just allow us to do all these good things at once. And so the ultimate goal for us and for all of our partners will just be to pursue a fiscally responsible policy that prioritizes the well-being of former foster youth. So we've talked a lot today about some hard and sad things, but we know that we can better support our most vulnerable Oklahomans here. And we know that fiscal policy is one of the tools that we have to make a difference. So we hope that you'll consider supporting this effort. For us, it's not necessarily putting a logo on something. It's more about being able to say, OCCY supports this idea. You guys have so much credibility at the Capitol, and so being able to talk to lawmakers about the fact that you recognize this is a problem and this could be a potential solution, we see as something that would be very powerful. Thank you all for the work that you do every day and for being here, and we would love to take any questions.
Thank you so much for presenting. I just wanted, before we get into questions and comments, just to make a note that this is a conversation that started with our OCCY Strengthening Transitions for Youth Aging Out of the System. So this began as an OCCY committee process with many partners like you all. And so I just wanted to kind of make that known that this is a little different than the last bill that we heard, in that it came out of one of our committees. So I'll open it up for discussion, questions.
Is there similar programs that have been done in other states that you were able to locate or best practices?
Yeah, so one that I can name off the top of my head, Vermont has implemented something like this with a lot more money. They provide like direct cash assistance to foster youth aging out of the system. So this is like the other extreme of that, where we're just providing that $500 that could pay for a birth certificate order or getting your driver's license. These are the types of things that you don't have the support to be able to go and get yourself when you don't have that adult support. So Vermont is one example. I'm sure there are more. I would have to do more research, but I could definitely do that research and provide that information for you.
So there is some funding already in this space. So we're just talking about increasing that. Is that what the committee was kind of thinking about, the committee that you mentioned? Because there's already funding in OCCY for the 18 to 21, doesn't go all the way to 25. Population doesn't mean that there's always, enough resources there, but some of those things like helping with housing assistance or,
Down payment on a
transportation.
car, yeah.
Right, exactly. There is already some funding there. And so I just want to be.
Do you all know about that funding?
We've worked with OCCY, particularly Robbie, really closely on creating this. So we are kind of seeing this as like a supplement, right? We have state funding.
Like increasing the
Yes,
funding.
increasing, not
Flexible funding.
supplementing funding or not supplanting funding that's already there, but just kind of as another level of support.
The funding that's there right now currently is federal funding. And so I think it's about, I want to say about $2.2 million that's in that space. There are other resources for youth that have aged out of care. Medicaid eligibility is one of those that goes to 26. And then educational support, which is through another set of federal dollars that occurs. And so there are some different supports, but so this is the, I guess, the thing you're raising. It's not a request. There's not a request bill on this. I know that we had
When I've talked to Representative Lawson, he's certainly very interested in trying to figure out how do you support youth that are aging out of care.
Thank you for those comments. I have a question. So how would this be tied to education and the things you mentioned? How would we ensure that it's tied to those things?
Yeah, so our understanding, and this is again particularly coming from OCCY and talking with Robbie about the infrastructure they have. There are programs where the youth have to provide documentation or have to be in contact with, the OCCY representative. And so it basically would be an extension of what they're doing with that documentation and that kind of thing. It would not be $500 to the youth. It would be $500 to the landlord or to the electricity bill, that kind of thing.
That's great clarification. Thank you.
Yeah. And I will say that kind of to Dr. Shire's question, we had originally started talking about a tax credit, particularly the earned income tax credit, because this is a group that doesn't currently qualify for that credit. So folks who are 26 or who are in this group and have kids do qualify, but this group specifically doesn't qualify for that credit and also doesn't have that familial support. So we started looking at it at the tax credit and ultimately kind of pivoted to this as a way to provide that support, but with a little bit more flexibility and a little kind of just as a way that, we already have infrastructure and that kind of thing.
I think when we originally talked about this bill, there was like, we're going to give them a certain amount of money every year. And there were a lot of questions. Oh, how much money? You're just going to give them a Visa gift card or just like give them cash? Because that, that might not be the best financial way to do it. So I appreciate that you've worked with OCCY so there would be an application process or some kind of, they'd have to show a need and then OCCY would approve it and
Would it
give
just
it to
work through
them?
Yes, I Can? Is that what you all talked about? The current process or whatever? Okay. So I'll tell you how the current process is that I don't know if this is, because I'm not actually familiar with the conversations that have happened with OCCY, but the current process is that former foster youth can reach out and there's a case management element of figuring out what the need is. And then there's sort of some limits on what can be used for housing or transportation and things like that. But the case management aspect figures out what is that youth needing for that moment to help them. Often it's bridge stuff. So even for the kids that are in college, and we have a lot of kids in college actually who've aged out of foster care in Oklahoma, but even for the kids in college, you think about summer break, you think about summer times or other kinds of breaks where they may not be allowed to stay in housing or different kinds of things like that. So anyway, some of those kinds of things. We're also trying to do a better job of making sure those kids are connected with other support benefits that they may be eligible for transition SNAP or things like that they may be eligible for while they're moving toward adulthood and towards independence. So I'm assuming, I shouldn't assume because I don't know exactly what's been worked out, but the current process does have a case management, figuring out case by case what that youth needs with some caps on how the funding is used for each youth.
So Deb, this may be a question for you because you're the primary responsible
Yeah.
party or agency for our kids in foster care, including, and I know aging out is a nationwide issue. I had the privilege of serving on Texas CASA's board, and it's a huge issue that we spend a lot of time on. I'd be very interested in kind of what is the grand plan, if you want to call it that, or strategy of how do we deal with kids coming out of foster care and understanding what is going to be the need to actually deal with that. This seems to be partial.
Yeah.
But what is the total fiscal need to deal with kids aging out of foster care and all the services they need to understand this is what we're really focused on, is trying to get to this point. This is kind of a step, but is this, where's the ultimate outcome?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know that you can answer it with a single answer because to say kids aging out of foster care implies they're all the same.
Right.
And that's not true. And so what we have focused on as a state, maybe I can address that, is trying to figure out how to move teenagers to permanency. So we've reduced the number of youth who are aging out of foster care by about a half over the last 7 or 8 years through a lot of the child welfare reform efforts, which is a pretty big deal to go from 350 or 400 kids to 150 to 200 kids a year. But when you look at those kids, they don't all look the same. And so there's a group of kids who are going to transition some kind of an adult assistive system. So think about kids that may have intellectual disability, who may actually transition into supports that the adult DD system, for example, might need to offer. There's a group of kids that may be needing significant behavioral health or health care transition around that time. And then there's other kids that are truly sort of stepping into college or after high school kind of education, jobs, those kinds of things. So I think it's easier to sort of say, here's a group of kids, how would we transition them and what will that cost, or what's the system needed for that, than it is to say overall. But our state has made a lot of, I think, improvement over the last 6 or 7 years in lowering the number of kids and in providing supports for those kids. There are quite a lot of states that have foster care extensions to 21, or even a couple of states, I think, to 25. We've looked at that. We've done a little bit of analysis on that. I don't have it in front of me. I want to say it's somewhere in, well, I shouldn't say out loud because I don't have the report in front of me, but I do have a report that says what would it cost if we went to foster care 21. I think I haven't quite figured out what that gets the kids. It creates a whole bunch of extra system. But I want to know, what does it actually get for the kids, for the young people? Because a lot of kids at 18 they believe they're ready to get away from us. Even if we all know as parents or as adults who've done that transition, they're still going to need some things. And so I'm interested in trying to figure out how we continue to build supports that have a lot of flexibility. So I would say this kind of an approach is aligned with what we've tried to do, as opposed to just building a whole other extended foster care system. But it's incomplete, to your point. It's a piece.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And this is a bit kind of leveraging off of what you and your colleagues were able to achieve on the DUA list.
Yep.
Is finally we said, this is the investment that's required to terminate.
To actually get.
And that's the question here. What's the investment we ought to all be kind of trying to
Aim for. Yeah, that's
to
a good
know how
question.
far or how close we are in terms of at least asking for fiscal support.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we know the number for extending foster care, but again, I'm not totally convinced if that's the solution, actually. So yeah, there's probably some work still to do to understand.
I would add that working with a whole program of kids that have just aged out of foster youth for the independent living program, we get so many calls from OCCY that need not placement, it's not placement because they're young adults, but they need housing.
Yeah.
So that's the fundamental need, is that they need housing. And then you have providers that are willing to provide housing, but there's no funding to support that provider. So that is an overall arching thing that we see, and especially in rural areas, but also even like in Tulsa, you have YST. There's not a ton of transitional housing for youth that have aged out. So it's a lot of nonprofits picking up the piece of that. So to me, as a bystander and as a person working in this field, working with youth that have aged out, it's the housing component.
Yes, just to comment on that. I think there's two issues. There's not enough providers in this space. And there's not enough capacity in terms of funding for current providers in the space. So, for youth and family in El Reno, we have a independent living program, and we currently have 8 young adults in that program, and we have a waiting list. And I hear this number of 200, and there's many more kids than 200.
Yeah.
Because a lot of kids, they don't age out of the system. They age out of their families.
Yeah.
They've gone back home. They've become homeless. We have kids all the time. They're living at the lake in tents, living in their cars in Walmart parking lots. And I would say probably 50% have aged out of DHS custody, and the rest, didn't age out of that system, or they aged out of OJA custody. And, when I hear 200 aging out of DHS, and we're maybe serving 4 currently that aged out of DHS, that's a drop in the bucket. So we really have got to figure out, I think, as a state, how do we add more providers, and how do we coordinate those providers so we're working together, and then also fund the current and future providers in the space.
And I think we didn't, I'll just add on, I don't think we really helped DHS in this getting off the waiting list in the state because of the non-providers that are out there. A lot of them dried up during COVID. They just couldn't stay in that space. And so I think that's really negatively impacting you on as an agency, and how you're seen as how quickly you're getting them out, and served. So, I know that's going down a whole nother bunny trail, but it all impacts this whole issue, right? We see it in DRS too, in working with DHS, and if they have beyond a developmental disability, any other type of disability, we will help them transition in a different way alongside you, but that's even more money that, we're all putting together for that one individual. So we have the same problem on the homelessness and,
Yeah.
it's just a real crisis.
One of the things I struggle trying to balance is both acknowledging that we have a responsibility, kids who age out of our care, just like parents, like as a
Sure.
parent, like those are my kids, even though they're not 10,
Right.
20, 21. And at the same time, I want to try to get kids to permanency, not make it lucrative to age out of care. You know what I mean? Or not, and I don't mean lucrative for the kid. I just mean that there's a lot more support in that space.
Agreed.
That's one of the things that's always bothered me about the way the Medicaid rules came down was if you have a kid that could be adopted or moved to a guardianship at 17, there's a loss of some significant benefit of turning 18 in foster care, and that doesn't seem right.
Right. I agree.
And so there are some policy problems in that sort of older youth space that, anyway, I'm always kind of trying to think through, how do we support those kids that move into a permanent family at 16 or 17, not just they sit in foster care till 18. That doesn't seem good either. So anyway, that doesn't necessarily answer this question, because I think this is aimed very much at those youth who we can't move to permanency, and there isn't even more support. But you're right, a whole lot of the kids that are out there that are homeless at 19 are not necessarily just kids who came from foster care or from foster care at 18. They may have at some point in the past been in that system. So it's a hard group to get your hands around to say, here's the
It's a tough
cost
one.
and
Very
solution.
needed though. Just to steer back on this legislation with this, and this is maybe a dumb question, so excuse me. Would this legislation, this bill fund that then would be administered by DHS, or would funding have to come out of their current budget?
It would be additional funding. Yeah, like in all the conversations with Representative Lawson, it's supplemental funding. So looking at the increase in revenue that we have, like trying to use some of that for this school.
Is there a bill number that he's identified already?
House Bill 1929 is Speaker McCall's bill that would increase the population that OCCY serves from 21 to 25. And so but Representative Lawson is likely going to be like running that through the process. So he's looking at that one. He hasn't solidified as that plan. He's also got like some other ideas, but that's kind of the front runner.
Okay. Have any other questions?
Dr. Deb, I just want to say that next Thursday is the committee deadline, so we'll know something by next Thursday.
Earlier in your presentation, you talked about a number of the negative outcomes for youth who age up. Tied to this, have you all taken that step further, thinking about the 200 that may qualify for this if it moves forward? We are actually going to measure maybe these key outcomes to prove that this stipend is making a difference.
I think that is an essential component in making policy in the future, because you've all identified this as just one piece of solving the problem. So I think it's really important to measure the success of those outcomes and how efficient giving this $500 would be. I think it would depend on OCCY providing that information, but I would love to look at it.
And in the conversations we had with OCCY, there was talk about evaluation, and I don't know exactly what that would look like. Dr. Schreier can probably talk to that more than I can, but yeah, with OCCY, we were definitely talking about using existing infrastructure to see what the outcomes were associated.
I mean, we submit the national data, NIDA data, so youth transition data. So I'm assuming they would imagine continuing as they submit that annually to see are there changes. The flexibility is both needed and also makes it hard to say we're spending money for this thing so we can measure this outcome. But they do gather data on our youth that have transitioned out annually, and it's submitted to veterans.
I think the hardest thing would be, what are we going to measure? Because it's, you have tons of data on that.
Right.
That was
Yeah.
Questions? I'll entertain a motion.
So since this kind of originated here, we're okay to move forward. Okay. I'll make a motion.
Second.
Just clarification for me. The last one was the same as this one, which we did not take a vote because I think the comment was, the vote was really to say we would allow our logo to be on a piece of paper. What are we agreeing to do here?
Right.
For the same thing.
I think we need to clarify the motion.
That, in speaking to legislators, that OCCY is in favor of this idea. What do we think?
I missed you, I'm sorry. I just was gonna comment that this is one of our OCCY request bills as well. But I missed your comment, sorry.
Then that would be a moot point because we would obviously be in favor of our
Well,
request bill.
But we already approved.
we would
the
like
request
it,
bill.
we would like it to be one of our request bills. It originated here. And we didn't vote on it last time because we didn't have any specifics and it was really a concept still.
It's not a request bill though, if there's already another bill running, right? So it would be the same thing.
So I misspoke.
Yeah, no, that's okay, but I mean, I think that's. I think I'm still unclear.
Would it be that we support additional services for youth aging out of foster care? I see in, like Commissioner Reed pointed out, we don't know what the final language would
Yeah.
be. Because we don't have a bill number.
You're put on the spot.
I know, I'm just trying to think through what the motion would look like, but I mean, I think what we're talking about is, do we want Marcia at the Capitol in this space, continuing to work on behalf of our committee and OCCY in this space? Is that correct?
Like we
That's
do
what
with the seatbelt bill, when you voted on the seatbelt bill. So we're actively supporting that. Because it's one of our recommendations from Child Death Review Board.
And I mean, I hear your comments about, we don't know the outcome of the bill yet, but we really never do, which is difficult.
See, and that's something, we don't know the language right now. For me, I asked a bunch of the questions that the director referenced just a minute ago. If this was gonna be just a stipend to each kid out there, $500, $1,000 or more, there's no way I could ever go along with that. I think that's reckless. If this is a situation where we're gonna reimburse a child to help them get an education or go to trade school or something along those lines, I'm all in on doing anything I can do to help with that. So there's a big difference here in what we're talking about. If it comes out that other with, well, we're just gonna give them money, let them go out and spend. I mean, that changes it. And I think I see a bunch of heads shaking, it probably changes it for everybody in the room. So I think clarifying what we're gonna support here is extremely important.
So I think we
Need to add the caveat that it's
We
in
do-
support
yeah,
through the OCCY process.
It's really, I think what I hear is that we're trying to approve increased funding for OCCY for what they're already doing. Is essentially what it is. They're already doing case management. They're already doing a selective process and they do a good job. And so when they're able to, a kid calls and says, I'm about to lose my apartment, can you pay my rent? They submit an application, all the supporting documents, then OCCY pays that provider, that landlord directly. So it's not coming to the kid's hand directly. And that's what they're asking, is essentially to increase out of a different bucket of money than what is already getting, is what it sounds like.
An additional.
An additional, yeah.
Supplemental.
Yeah.
But it's also tied with extending that age.
Yes.
range.
One option would be that we could table this agenda item until the April meeting, and then we would better know what the language looks like.
That sounds like a good plan.
That's just an option I'm throwing out there.
far along in the legislative process for our legislators.
There was a motion in a second, right? So we've got to do something with that.
Correct, so.
I maybe will make a motion to amend the prior motion to say the OCCY would support the concept of increasing funding to this age group 18 to 25 that would help them with life skills or something to that effect, so that we know where it's going.
Thank you for that. So we have a amended motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, please call vote.
Commissioner Aaron,
Yes.
Secretary Corbett,
Abstain.
Director Front,
Yes.
Commissioner Hall,
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington,
Yes.
District Attorney Hicks,
Yes.
Director Holt,
Yes.
Commissioner Laird,
Yes.
Commissioner Myers,
Yes.
Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Schneider,
Yes.
Director Shropshire,
Yes.
and Commissioner Wilson.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is agenda item number 9. We have a presentation on the juvenile competency restoration outpatient program. I will turn the floor over to Kathy.
Good morning, Director Jacoby. Thank you for this opportunity to present. And I know you all have been here over an hour, so I will be very brief. And I was told to be very brief. So basically, we need this, so I hope you will support it. I have included a handout for you, actually 2 handouts. A few years ago, Oklahoma participated in writing the guidelines through a working group through OCCY to establish juvenile competence to stand trial. And we were one of the last states to do so, to acknowledge that this needed to happen. There was a case from 1989 that stated that juvenile delinquency is all about treatment and not about a criminal case. And so based on that, for many years, competency in juvenile court was pretty much ignored here in Oklahoma. And there were several national articles that were written, and oftentimes Oklahoma was included in one of the states that had not pursued this. But when the statutes were written in our working group, we tried to model them after other jurisdictions such as Massachusetts, Virginia, and Florida. And in doing so, we tried to create quality control for evaluators' qualifications. Because of the differences between juveniles and adults, we included developmental immaturity, we included developmental disability, we included mental illness and intellectual disability. So this was a good thing because we had written in developmental immaturity, which is in line with the national guidelines developed by Thomas Grisso, who's a leading author in juvenile competence and in juvenile cases anyway. He does a lot of research in this area. So immediately we realized, or I realized along with some other people, that it had been written into the statute that we were to provide services. So what I tried to do several years ago with the help of Mark James and several people at OCCY, we created a video, which is now on YouTube. And I utilized TU law students, 3rd-year TU law students, to help write the script. And then Judge William Hiddle, who is a special judge in Tulsa County, agreed to be on the video. We had a juvenile defense attorney and a juvenile DA. And so the video, we had the law students come in, they were the jurors, the bailiff, the court reporter. We had all this set up. We did the video. And in the video, we were trying to instruct children on very basic things like what to wear to court, what not to wear to court. So this was our first iteration of trying to establish something to comply with the statute under 2-2-401.7, which requires the court, when the court decides that a juvenile is incompetent, to create a plan for services. And along this line, I have done evaluations in Tulsa County Juvenile Court for about 6 years now, I guess it is. And my problem in answering those questions for competence was along the line of, you would have someone who was, let's say, early onset schizophrenia, a juvenile who was early onset schizophrenia in the community. And there really are no remediation services other than let's send that child to a psychiatrist to get appropriate medication, and maybe that will assist in restoring their competence. And then on the other hand, you have cases where the evaluator believes that their competence will never be restored because they are at such a low intellectual level. So the ones in between that could actually benefit from services, they were not out there. So Dr. Steve Grissom and I and those people in our working group discussed all this, and we found a retired special education teacher to volunteer to help some of these juveniles in restoring their competence. Because with juveniles, when you're talking about developmental immaturity and developmental disabilities, the research and the jurisdictions that have implemented this have often used retired special education teachers to do this. But you cannot ask someone to do that on a voluntary basis for a long period of time all across the state. So we were trying to figure out what else we could do. So with this video and the special education teacher, we had a couple of cases that were worked in this way, but there is nothing currently established as a remedial program in our state in any county. So this is why when Director Jacoby asked me, I created this description and looked at what some other states have done. And I also included in your packet for you to look at the Utah Juvenile Competence Restoration Program there. The person that has been at the forefront of this work is Neil Goen-Smith, and he is a forensic psychologist in Denver, Colorado, and has done a lot of work on competency, but especially with respect to juvenile competency. And he's helped various states create these programs. And so I've included this as an example of what might be helpful in Oklahoma in terms of concrete manuals and concrete, as you'll see here, we have several modules, 1 through 10. And the modules actually assist the special education teacher in helping to train and do this type of instruction, education for the child who does not presently have the capacity to understand the court process. And so that's why I included that for you. It's not that we would have to adopt this particular program, but it's a really well done set of modules, I think, that is descriptive of what Oklahoma could do. And at one point when I was doing some of these evaluations 3 years ago, I had a request from a judge in Wisconsin to do a juvenile competence evaluation on a child that was living here in Tulsa County. So because of that, I ended up interacting with the Wisconsin Outpatient Competency Restoration Program for juveniles in that state. And it was amazing, truly amazing. They're done on an outpatient basis. Most of these juveniles can be treated and receive this training on an outpatient basis. And so this particular jurisdiction did such a great job at providing remediation. And what would happen is I would do a report, then the court decided that the child was incompetent. So the restoration services proceeded via telehealth from Wisconsin on an outpatient basis. And Sarah Diddle, who was the director of that program, provided me with a lot of insight into how we could do that here in Oklahoma and do it efficiently on an outpatient basis. So included in your packet is a description of some of the topics to be addressed in the restoration process and some of the strategies that we could use with kids. For example, you can do role playing, you can show videos, which is what we tried to create with OCCY, and that was my hope, that some of these kids with that type of instruction who are visually, they do better with visual presentations, could view this video and then do the modules with the special education teacher to teach them, and the special education teacher would provide a periodic report during the time period that the juvenile was receiving these services. And so in your handout, you will see that the outcome data is extremely good for these programs. The number of days needed for restoration, it increased the percentage of juveniles restored from 56 to 95% using this program. The improved outcomes are believed to be the result of appropriate training and supervision by the administrator of this outpatient program. And it's important to note that the people that do the remediation training should be qualified personnel. They should have appropriate training. And this is why so many jurisdictions have hired retired special education teachers to do just that, because they are so familiar with these children and the behaviors and their presentation and the records that are received to the court that are given to the restoration provider. That is also provided in the statute, that these records need to be provided to the evaluation, to the restoration provider. So to have someone such as a special education teacher would be extremely helpful. So there is no national program that is the gold standard. There are many, many programs that have been utilized. One of those is the one I mentioned about Utah. There is one in Florida that is really well established on an outpatient basis. They have the videos and the manuals and the personnel to do these. Let's see. So in this handout, I've outlined that to do this as part of a pilot project, we would likely need the following personnel to implement it. We would need a part-time administrator in whatever pilot program we set up in whatever jurisdiction to arrange the training for providers and a case manager. We would hire a public special education teacher to provide these services on a part-time basis at the cost of $50 an hour. Now, the reason I mentioned the $50 an hour is because when the volunteer special education teacher that we worked with was doing these, she indicated that at that time, several years ago, that $35 an hour would be considered a suitable compensation for this particular type of individual to do this instruction. So $50 an hour is negotiable, up, down, whatever you would decide. But I think at this point in 2023, that's probably a reasonable compensation for doing this kind of work. And then we would hire a case manager to assist in providing referrals for resources in the community. A lot of times these kids have, let's say, a PTSD diagnosis or other trauma, early parental death, which has gone unnoticed and not addressed. And so the case manager in these particular cases could assist the child in getting to the appropriate therapist to then assist the child and help them emotionally. And if you think about it, if a child is going to be asked to testify in a case, many children, many juveniles and adults become extremely anxious in doing so. And so to address the trauma and anxiety that a lot of these children have, as well as depression and PTSD, would be a good thing to do as well. And that is how they have structured this program in Wisconsin. Then we could also, as part of this, contract with a psychiatrist to provide medication services on a part-time basis. So with that particular group of personnel, I think it would be efficient and it would be economical to provide these services, because under our state law at the present time, the section 2-2-401.7, where the court is to implement a plan, is not being realized at all. And I'm certain that it must be frustrating for judges in juvenile court that wonder where those services reside and how these children can receive those services. So are there any questions that I can answer?
Is there anything that you are requesting from this body for a vote on?
Basically, if we could vote on the concept of having an outpatient restoration program in Oklahoma to look at how we can then comply with the statutes under Title 10A.
I would just say, full disclosure, in 2016, as a ADA in Oklahoma County, I participated in the writing of the juvenile competency law. And so I'm familiar, I'm like pulled up and was like, what did we do there again? And I'm looking at Director Jacoby's report on page 8, where it talks about the competency evaluations and the numbers we have. So in state fiscal year 22, and there's a column that says there were 32 juveniles declared not competent. There's not a breakdown of whether or not they were deemed competent and able to restore, or competent, not able to restore. I don't know if we know which ones. So the most we were talking, and that's the highest year, previous years were 13, 18, 24, and 32. So it'd be 32 youth, and only a percentage of those would be this able to be restored with some kind of restorative program. And then these are kids from across the state, not particularly one county. We know traditionally one county in the state, even when a child is deemed not competent, the judges tend to move forward in the case without giving credit to that to that opinion of qualified forensic evaluators. And I think that the issue with why we have not yet stood up this restoration program is because the numbers are kind of smaller and across the state. And so I think we would just have to have some thought and planning. I guess is the idea of the pilot of where this would happen, because it's very likely, I think the most competency evaluations come out of Oklahoma and Tulsa County. So, to have an outpatient program anywhere in the state only is convenient for those surrounding counties. And then also the funding, as I've said multiple times, this is a task that OCCY has taken on, thankfully, but has never been appropriated to take on. So I would be real concerned for OCCY to spend money on this administrator and this case manager for what would be less than 32 cases statewide. So those are some of the questions I have. And are you asking that OCCY be the owner of this and be financially responsible for doing this case management piece and paying for these services? I think I saw some language in here about DHS maybe being in charge of it.
So Mr. Slatton Hodges is not here to defend herself, but hopefully you might be aware that DMH handles all competency issues with regards to adults. So I'd be very interested to understand their point of view with regards to what should be the right approach to deal with from a juvenile standpoint, and who best should be in place to administer that. Because I think they have significant experience, at least from the adult side.
Yes, Commissioner, this is Shamika Williams sitting in for Carrie Slatton Hodges. And so the question is, not very often do we identify cases of youth that need competency restored. I mean, we've had a couple of cases that we ran through our CRC and sent for access for treatment services. Currently, right now, we're not responsible, but again, as you mentioned, we do have an adult system that does these types of evaluation. And so I would definitely want to talk to our leadership about what options there will be for DMH.
And in statute, the evaluation of whether or not you're competent is robust. We unfortunately don't have enough evaluators in the state to do these robust evaluations. But as far as what the services are needed, yes, we lack knowing what services are needed and then who provides those services. But I'm not wanting OCCY to further have financial or employee obligation to something until you are statutorily and appropriated to do so.
That comment. Are there any other comments or questions? Would anybody like to make a motion of any kind on this agenda item?
So what is the original request? What is the request?
Dr. LaFortune, can you help us answer that? What is the request here?
Well, I'm not really making a request other than to look into this in the future so that we can really strategize and come up with a way to help restore the children that need this particular process to be in place, because it is in the statute. I'm not asking OCCY to financially cover this at all. This is just a presentation for your benefit to consider how we might go about remedying this, because it is in our statute. It is not being addressed. Judges have nowhere to go to send these kids for services. In the reports that the evaluators that do these, I think most of the time, the only recommendations that we can make if a child has a significant major mental illness is to a psychiatrist for appropriate medication, but that does not solve completely the issue for developmental immaturity, which is on the juvenile side of this, requires a more specialized professional to evaluate and treat, and developmental immaturity, which is not addressed in the adult system at all. So while mental illness is addressed in the adult system, the whole concept of developmental immaturity and developmental disabilities are more akin to professionals who have that education in child development, early childhood development, and other related subjects that they would have appropriate training to address. And that's why these other jurisdictions have hired special education teachers and people that have this background, because it is unique for juvenile competence restoration. And what some of these other jurisdictions have also done is participate in telehealth, which would be extremely helpful in rural jurisdictions and rural counties.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for the clarification and thank you for your presentation
Yes, sir.
today. Does anybody else have
If I could real
questions?
quick, I think this is especially germane because I've dealt with this issue twice this week. And we've been advised, when we have two juveniles been found incompetent by an evaluator, and we were advised, well, there's nothing you can do, there are no services. You have to dismiss the case and move on and give it to DHS. And going, no, that's not really the way this is going to work, because if we do that, we dismiss it, we've set that juvenile back out in the community and they continue to commit delinquent acts. Where are we then? Can we charge them with and we file another petition against them? There are a lot of issues there. And then if that juvenile commits an especially heinous crime, where's the liability going to fall? Is it going to fall on the DAs? Is it going to fall on the courts? Is it going to fall on OJA? Is it going to fall on somebody else? I think this discussion has to, and I see the directors, I mean, we all have that same reaction. I think there are at least 4 groups that need to be at the table when this is discussed, and that's going to be the DAs, the judges, the Office of Juvenile Enforcement, and I think the Department of Mental Health. And I also think Department of Human Services needs to be there too. So if we set up a task force or something to begin looking at this, I think that would be a great thing, because we truly are seeing this more and more and more every single day in our courts. And I'm in rural Oklahoma, and 2 of them in 1 week, it's already happened. And we're starting to see them, and especially with the use, and I'm gonna get into something maybe a little more controversial, but the marijuana usage in kids and the high THC content is really messing with our kids. And we've got to do something to step in and try to get them restored and get them back to where they can understand what's going on and can function, and can actually go into the courtroom and assist their attorneys and the courts with getting back to where they need to be.
I appreciate your comment just now, because I echo what you just said about marijuana use. And we know so much about brain development now, and how marijuana use with these kids affects brain development negatively for many, many years cognitively into adulthood. And the THC levels are so much higher. And one of the recommendations we make in these competency reports, if there's a substance abuse issue, is to get substance abuse treatment, which is extremely difficult to find. And but that absolutely is one of the major issues that we deal with, because these kids believe it to be an herb and a plant, and with no negative effects whatsoever. So as part of that competency restoration process, if they do have a substance abuse issue that could be handled outpatient, then they can come back to court having received that 6-month period of time, or the 12-month period of time in this treatment, and come back to court and actually understand what is happening with their case. So, thank you.
I think from this discussion, we've identified that we probably need to get a work group together. I'll commit that OJ will be a part of that.
Yeah, we'll be a part of it.
DAC.
Yeah.
DHS.
A motion to that effect. I'd like to make a motion to launch that task force.
Who would be in charge of launching it? Dr. Fortune or?
I have the authority and statute to create task force. If we do it that way, then we have to somebody has to write a report and submit it to the governor's office. But actually, this is a great subject matter, and I think it would illuminate a gap that we have in the state of Oklahoma.
What if we just did an informal working group? You do that too. I like that.
And I would invite you, and I can send you the link to watch the OCCY juvenile competence training video that was created, because that was our initial thought, was other jurisdictions do this and it helps these kids become educated about the court process. And so I will send that to Director Jacoby to send out to all of you. It's not very long, about 30 minutes. And we had the cooperation of the district attorneys, the defense attorney, the judge, the TU Law School, and it was really well done. But we have nowhere to use it.
Right. Well, thank you so much for offering that up and for your presentation today. And those of you in the room, thank you for your commitment to working on that group and in this space.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Do we need to vote to launch that work group? Can I entertain a motion?
Maybe a little more formal.
More informal? Okay. We will move on to agenda item number 10, director's report, and I will turn the floor over to Annette Jacoby. Can't talk anymore.
So I submitted a written report. I'll just highlight a couple of things. I'd like to introduce Mahbub Al-Haq, who's over here, and a long-awaited arrival to fill our business manager position. And we are thrilled beyond belief. We stole him away from the district attorney's council. Sorry. But we are happy to have him here. So you will see reports from him in the future. This is his 3rd day or so. It's not very many days. Is this just your first week, right?
Yes.
Okay, there you go. See, so we're happy to have him, and you'll see him in the future along with Megan giving the finance reports. And then I did want to follow up on the heels of what DA Hicks was talking about. Dr. Shropshire, several of us in the room get the initial reports from DHS, and we're all kind of tired of seeing kids having to seek medical attention because of medical marijuana exposure. And so Dr. Shropshire put out a plea on an email one day and said, what are we going to do about this, or something to that effect? And so a group of us have started meeting So we do recognize it's a horrendous issue right now. It really is. We're all tired of seeing it.
Can I interrupt for just a half second? I saw something in a news report that came out. It was I was one of the stations in Tulsa. I did a presentation last week on the upcoming state question. And in that, they noted accidental exposure, or whatever you want to call it, exposure to marijuana for children 5 and under from 2010 to 2018. In the state of Oklahoma, there were 54 children that were exposed. Last year, in 2022, there were 296. And there were over 40% of those kids that went to ICU and remained in the hospital for a period of time. And I'm going, these are only the kids that were taken to the ICU or taken to the emergency room. I'm going, we went from 54 in 9 years to 296 in 1 year. I think that says everything we need to know about where we are in the state with our marijuana policy.
Well, there's a crew of us. Go ahead. You know what's, no, you sure? You sure? Okay. All that to say is there's a crew working on it, but I'm sure we're going to start adding more people to it because we've got some gaps in our group and we recognized that the other day. So we'll probably be tapping some more folks. Other than that, I just want to remind you, if you have a few minutes at the end of this meeting, we did have the governor sign a proclamation for Parent Leadership Month, which was February. So it is concluding. We do have the proclamation here. And if you have a few minutes, we would love to have you take a picture with a couple of our members of our Parent Partnership Board and give the idea and the concept a little social media love. So that'd be great. That's all.
Perfect.
Happy to answer any questions if you had them based on my report.
Jeanette, do you have any questions? Okay, agenda item number 12. I'm not going to say much because I don't want to be the person between now and lunch, but thank you all for being here. I know that she appreciates the attendance, and thank you staff who are in the room and prepared for this meeting and the work that you do here at the commission. We appreciate your team very much and the work you do. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion is second. We are adjourned.
Ooh, I love that.